Let's see.
If I could remind everybody to please put themselves on mute.
Thank you, Doug. And good morning, everybody. This is the Juneau Gastineau Rotary Club on October 29th. And today we have a program by two of our club members, Alice Edwards and Dan Blydorn. I was almost going to say Indiana Bulb, but here we are. And they're going to talk to us about air quality here in Juneau. So take it away. Dan, are you on mute?
Good morning. Hopefully you can see my screen here.
Yes, go ahead.
Awesome. And then Alice, do you want to introduce yourself as well? So I'm Dan Blydorn, and I work for the City and Borough of Juneau as a Lands and Resources Manager. And we, as part of our duties here, we monitor the air quality and enforce the program in the Mendenhall Valley and in Lemon Creek, which we'll be talking about today.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Can everybody hear me all right? Can you guys hear me? Great. This is Alice Edwards. I am the director for the Division of Air Quality for the Department of Environmental Conservation. And when I first started my career in air quality in Juneau, I actually was in air monitoring and helped with the air quality plan. I still do help with the air quality plan for the Mendenhall Valley in Juneau. So have been working on Juneau Air Quality for about 30 years now.
It's amazing.
And I think
too.
I'm gonna,
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Dan.
It's amazing too. I worked for the city and borough for 11 years, and I met Alice 11 years ago when I first started, and we had a meeting in my first few weeks of the office. So I'm glad that we're both in Rotary together now. It's nice.
Yeah, it's good. So I think I've got the first few slides. So Dan's going to advance them for me.
That sounds good.
So first, we're going to talk a little bit about what air quality means, what it is. Go ahead to the next slide. So air quality, we're talking about the air around us. We work, where I work is with outdoor air quality or ambient air quality. You often hear people talk about indoor air quality as well. DEC, we focus on outdoor air quality, and we all want to have good, clean, unpolluted air to breathe. And it's important not just for us, but for wildlife, vegetation, water, and soil. Things that are put up in the air often deposit on the land and in the water. So, you know, what's in one state can move to another. And poor air quality comes from a number of places, but mostly the fact that we combust fuels. So we get a lot of air pollution that comes just from combusting fuels, whether it's gasoline or oil or wood. All of these things are sources of air pollution. Our automobiles, assuming we're not running on electric cars with hydropower. But it comes from all different sources. Some are natural and some are human caused. We also have many natural sources of air pollution, including vegetation, volcanoes, wildfire, things like that. So when we have poor air quality, it happens when pollutants concentrations in the air around us are high enough to start endangering our health and the environment. And the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States sets standards that help us gauge whether we're reaching levels that would endanger our health. And there are many things we can do every day that impact air quality or can mitigate air pollution. And those things include things like how we drive our cars, when and how we burn our wood. Those sorts of things all have a daily impact on our air quality. Go ahead to the next slide, Dan. So why is having clean air important? Go to the next slide. Really, the primary focus for us at DEC is really on the health effects of air pollution. As air pollution levels rise, we can have both short-term and long-term health effects from being exposed to high levels of air pollution. And most of us think about air pollution as impacting our lungs, and that is very true. A lot of the consequences of poor air quality or higher quality or high air pollutant concentrations are impacts to the lungs, but they can also stress our heart, shorten our lifespan, etc. So, and the air quality index that you see at the bottom of this slide, you'll often see when people are reporting air quality. If you've been watching wildfires down south, they've been often reporting the air quality index. And, you know, we want to be in that green level, but you can see that we move from good all the way up to hazardous. And I see regularly good air quality in Juneau, but in many parts of the state or during times when we have wildfires, you will see those reds start to show up in the air quality forecast and the air quality index across our state. Next slide. So in Juneau, one of the pollutants that we're most concerned about is particulate matter. And the PM that you see on this slide, it stands for particulate matter. And the 2.5 are particles that are less than 2.5 microns in diameter. That's a very fine particulate. And that's what you'll see coming from combustion sources. And then we also have had an issue with PM10 or particulate matter that's 10 microns in diameter and size or less, and in Juneau, and those are typically what we call coarse particulate matter. Often that is road dust, pollens, molds will fall into that category. And when Juneau was first had its air pollution characterized and issues raised, we did not have a standard for PM 2.5, but we did have a standard for PM10, and we were violating the PM10 standard at that time. And so the plan we have is built around PM10, but for the most part, the particles that we're really controlling now are the smaller PM 2.5 pollution, which is primarily coming from combustion sources. And as you can see, these are very, very tiny particles. So they're much smaller than the diameter of a human hair. You can't see them with the naked eye. So let me see if there's anything else I was going to say about this. So, and the PM 2.5 is the one that really creates a lot of health concern for folks. Some of the health effects from PM 2.5 include, let me just get my little list up here, sorry. Premature deaths from heart and lung disease, non-fatal heart attacks, irregular heartbeat, aggravated asthma, decreased lung function, and increased respiratory symptoms, which includes irritation of the airway, coughing, or difficulty breathing. And generally speaking, with these with air pollution, people with heart or lung diseases, children, and older adults are the most likely to be affected by particle pollution exposure. But as the concentrations get very high, it can impact even healthy individuals. I think we're ready for the next slide, Dan.
That sounds good. Before I move on to the next slide, I just wanted to touch base on a little something that you had mentioned, PM10, which we originally had standards for prior to the PM 2.5. Part of the mitigation strategy of the city for PM10 was actually working on paving roads and creating road standards that were paved in the Mendenhall Valley, because a lot of the PM10 was found to be from road dust, and majority of the roads in the valley at the time were dirt roads. And so since that time, when we went through a whole paving strategy and working with city code to make sure that new subdivisions would have paved roads, we've seen a significant decrease in PM10 to the point where, like Alice said, we're in obtainment. So where it's no longer, we very rarely go above the healthy level and the healthy standard index. And so the rest of my talk pretty much is going to be talking about the PM 2.5 and our mitigation strategy for that, because it's still ongoing. And so wood smoke is a major source of PM 2.5 in the Mendenhall Valley. I feel like I should have had a picture on this slide and it's not showing up, so that's a bummer. There we go. And so just so we're all aware, I live in the Mendenhall Valley and I have a wood stove, so this affects me as well. And so you can see here, there's some smoke coming out of that. There's regulations. It's supposed to be 50% opacity for that, which means there's a way you can shoot a laser at it and see the opacity of the smoke coming out of the wood stoves. And so what is the main factor that causes unhealthy air in the Mendenhall Valley? And so an air inversion, actually. So as much as we use our wood stoves when it's cold outside, it's not that we're doing something wrong. It's just the topography of the Mendenhall Valley is such that polluted warm air will actually hover at ground level, creating an increase in the concentration of these fine particulates. And at times, the level will reach the unhealthy stages. So think of the Mendenhall Valley as a big place that's blocked in by 3 walls, and during certain air conditions and weather patterns, polluted air stays at ground level, and then we request that people stop using their wood stoves. And so this weather pattern is called an air inversion. And so generally when you think about raising an elevation, you think, well, at Eagle Crest, it's colder than it is at ground level. And that's because generally speaking, air cools as it rises. So an air inversion is a situation where there's a warm layer, a lens that hovers over the top of a valley or a confined space that is warmer than the air above and below it. Or sorry, that the air around it is cooler than the air it is. The picture here is describing it probably better than I am. So you can see on the left-hand side, there's the normal pattern. Air at ground level is warm. It's cooler as it goes up. And then on the right-hand side, you can see there's an air inversion where there's cool air at the ground. That cool air fills up with wood smoke. The warm inversion layer prevents that smoke from rising and clearing. And then we start to see these higher concentrations. And so that's just another image of it there. You can see, again, showing that inversion layer. And so generally speaking, inversions happen in the Mendenhall Valley when we have really cold, clear, still days. Unfortunately, it's the days you usually like to use your wood stove. But we'll have a clear day, and then we'll be working with the weather station, NOAA on Back Loop Road, the National Weather Service. And we work with them when we think we're going to have an inversion. We discuss with them prior to calling an air emergency. And generally, they can tell us if they expect the inversion to break overnight or if it's going to last a few days. If they expect it to break overnight, we can usually avoid calling an air emergency. But if we see increased in pollution levels on the first day and they're telling us we're going to have an air inversion for a couple of days, we begin to monitor hourly, and then we'll call an air emergency if we expect it or it reaches the unhealthy level. And so here's a picture that I took from East Glacier Trail. And it was one of those days, it's hard to tell. It looked like it was a little bit cloudy here, but you can see kind of a good idea of what an inversion looks like. So there's a few people burning, and you can see that layer of smoke where it rises and kind of just stops and concentrates.
So moving into how we monitor for particulate matter in Juneau, over the years, we've had a number of different monitoring sites in the Mendenhall Valley. And when I first started, there were 4 or 5 different monitoring sites in the Mendenhall Valley, especially when we were trying to address the issues with road dust as well. So right now we have one primary site in the Mendenhall Valley in Juneau, and it's actually located on the roof of Floyd Dryden Middle School. We have 2 different types of monitors up there. Actually, I think we have 3. We have what we call the beta attenuation monitor, or the BAM. Those are a continuous monitor that monitor for particulates, and then that can be looked at in sort of semi-real time. And so folks like Dan can look at it and see if the concentrations are rising throughout the day. And that can help in forecasting whether we have an issue moving forward. And then we also have a regulatory monitor, which is the Partisol. And that is a filter-based a monitor that we use. And it's also monitoring PM 2.5, and I believe maybe PM 10. And it's all that data gets reported to EPA. And then you can actually see the data from Juneau on the DEC website. There's an air quality index website, so you can see what the concentrations are in at this site if you want to track them over time. We go to the next slide, Dan. And then this sort of gives you an idea of what the Partisol sampler looks like and measures. And you can see it's a filter-based, almost all particulate matter. There's sort of two ways of measuring particulate matter. The primary way that we use for regulatory purposes is actually with filters. And so you can see on this slide some of the filters. The samples run, it pulls, all these samplers pull air through them using pumps, and then the particles get lodged on the filters. And then the filters can be weighed before and after, and then we use that to calculate what the actual concentration of particulate matter is. And there's a lot of, EPA has a lot of requirements around how we handle those filters to ensure that we're getting good quality results that can be, sort of replicated, that we have good precision and accuracy in our data. I think that's all I want to say about that. And then here on this slide, you can see we do have the hourly data for Juneau's site on the DEC website. There's a couple of links at the bottom here where you can get to data on Juneau's air quality, as well as the real-time air quality hourly values, so you can check and see what your what the air pollution is like in the valley at any given time. Next slide, Dan.
Awesome. So I'm going to go back to the previous slide just for a second, just to talk about this a little bit more. So this is the data that we receive hourly from the DEC's monitoring station. And the city's role in this is to take that data and enforce a program that keeps the air at the healthy level. So we're the state and the EPA call it attainment. And so actually, when I first got hired for the city, when I was the land specialist, after my first year in air quality, we received a letter that we had 3 years in attainment. And so that was pretty exciting to come into a program at the time where our program was beginning to see real results. And so I just wanted to point out on this, in this image here, that so each hour we get a new data point, which is an average of the preliminary data. And then so our 24-hour average needs to stay below 35. So you can see these days here were pretty good. We had some increases and some decreases, and you can see it doesn't look like it was a sunny day here. When the sun hits the monitoring station, usually it causes the air to rise, and we see a decrease in particulate matter. So it's fascinating to get used to the weather patterns. And so I can look at this here and say, well, at least on March 6th, it was probably a cloudy day because we didn't see any major decreases there. And so in the Mendenhall Valley, when the particulate level reaches the unhealthy level, we actually call a wood smoke air emergency. And in these cases, all wood stove burning must stop. You're supposed to prevent yourself from using your wood stoves. This does not include pellet stoves. And so the image on the right here, you can see that's the area that we're talking about here. It's the Mendenhall Valley and the east half of the Mendenhall Peninsula. It goes to just past Fred Meyer, and then all the way back to Montana Creek and on the east side of Auk Lake. And so that's the area that we're talking about here. And so this is fascinating stuff, though. So if you don't live in this area, don't zone out just yet. It's, like I said, it's an interesting program, and it's been pretty successful on the national standard too. So it's something we can be proud of. And so during an air emergency, all wood stove burning in the Mendenhall Valley is prohibited. This does not include pellet stoves. And so this is just the ordinance that gives us the authority to monitor and regulate this program from the City Assembly. And so really the main part of our job here is to review the data, see that the levels are rising or becoming unhealthy, and then inform the public of our program that you can no longer burn your wood stoves. So this is how we do that. So first off, we have 12 big yellow signs. You saw them on a previous slide here. These red dots on the image of the valley there show where the signs are located and what streets they're on. And so this program started back in the late 1980s, and these signs have been up for a while. I believe they were put up in the early 2000s. And so thinking big yellow signs, they've actually been very helpful. And we did a survey back about 10 years ago, and people still wanted us to keep the signs up. And so when you're driving home or driving to work, you can look for those signs, especially if you remember you pass one on the way home. And usually they will catch your eye if they're open because they're rather large and bright yellow. And so another thing we do is we have public service announcements that will play on the radio. So when we call an air emergency, part of our list of people that we contact immediately are radio stations, and then they'll play just a 30-second blurb on the radio that's pre-recorded that says the city has called an air emergency. And then another way you can find out if there is an air emergency in place is to call our hotline, 586-5333. And you can call that hotline, and there's a pre-recorded message, and it will either say there is an air emergency in place or there is no air emergency in place. And then we update our website on juneau.org/lands. There's a big green or red box that will say air emergency is in place or air emergency is not in place. And then we have a newer program that started a few years ago, which is an automated text messaging service. So if you go to our website, you can sign up to receive an automated text message. And whenever we call or cancel an air emergency, it'll just shoot you a text to your cell phone. And so then we also have Facebook, because everything's on Facebook these days. And then we monitor it 24/7 during air quality season, which is October 1st through April 31st. And so during this season, my team, my coworker and I, we keep an eye on it. We split up the weekends and holidays, and we watch it every day. A lot of the time when it's pouring rain or it's super windy outside, we can be pretty confident that we're not going to have an air inversion or have poor air quality. So those days are pretty easy. But as soon as you start to see in the forecast a number of days of clear, cold weather, we begin to talk with the weather service and start to make sure we have everything in order in case we have to call one. And so this is how we inform the public. And informing the public is obviously the most important part of the entire program, I think, in my opinion, because you can have a lot of data, but if you don't get the public information and they don't understand the program, it's going to fall apart. So I feel like our program has been super successful, mainly because the residents of the Valley understand and they abide by it. And so it's fascinating to me too, because over the years I've received a number of phone calls from people down in Washington State, and actually we've had people from Nevada call us too, because they see our program and how long it's run, and they see we've gone from non-attainment to attainment, and they want to know how we did it. And so I think our program it's unique in the sense that we're just talking about wood smoke. We don't have a lot of pollutants or industry in the valley that's creating a higher risk level. But then also it's just the willingness of the citizens of the valley to work on this program with us. And so it's always interesting, and it's always fun to get a phone call from somebody else saying, wow, your program is super successful. How do we continue to do something like that over here? And other areas of the state are obviously having trouble with air quality and don't have regulation that's enforceable or citizens who are willing to abide by those regulations. So I'm grateful that our program is what it is. And so Alice, I think you're going to talk about downtown air quality.
Yeah, and before I start talking about downtown air quality, I wanted to echo what Dan just said about kudos to Dan and the folks at the city that are regularly implementing that program in the Valley, and also to the residents. Juneau really is a success story. In fact, we've been in attainment, frankly, in the Valley for more than a decade now. We just finished the first 10 years under what we call a maintenance plan for the Mendenhall Valley, and we're just starting into our second 10 years under the Clean Air Act for the maintenance plan for the Valley. But the program there has been really successful. And as I mentioned earlier, the standards for particulate matter, the national standards have changed over time, so that we were originally violating a standard that was at 150 micrograms per cubic meter, and the current standard is 35. And over the years, in 2009, when the fine particulate matter standard dropped from its original 65 to 35, the city and borough, we worked with the city and borough, and we're able to, modify that program in order to keep the Mendenhall Valley actually in attainment. It was not actually in attainment, or was very close to being in non-attainment at the new fine particulate matter standard of 35. And Juneau tweaked their program and has been implementing it, and it's been working. And that's thanks to folks like Dan at the city who are calling those alerts, and then also to the folks in the valley that are abiding by them. It's a real success story, and something I'm really proud as a Juneauite to, and having lived in the valley, to see that working together we can keep the air quality clean for everybody here in Juneau. And then the last slide we have here is a little bit about some monitoring that DEC has been doing over the last couple of years. In 2019, we did what we call a saturation study, and we put a number of air sensors, different types of air monitors. They're little tiny sensors. We put them out throughout the downtown area in 2019 and monitored during that cruise ship season. And and the monitors we used were called little purple air sensors. And I don't know if any of you had them at your home, but we had them scattered all over the downtown area that summer. And just to give you an idea, in downtown Juneau, even though we have a lot of ships coming in, we do see some of the exhaust from the ships coming into town. We often have a lot of wind in downtown Juneau. So while we have impacts there, the wind really helps to actually disperse the pollution, which is sort of the opposite of what's going on in the Mendenhall Valley in the wintertime. And so during the 2019 season, we saw that the air quality during that summer was generally good. When you looked at that air quality index, we were typically in the green, and you would have the concentrations would rise and fall throughout the day, but that ambient air quality standard for particulate matter is a 24-hour standard. So the days in 2019 that we saw where air quality was not great in downtown Juneau was actually not great anywhere in Juneau, and that was because we had some real strong wildfire impacts from Canada and Alaska during that summer. Typically, the cruise ship impacts we saw were short events that would last maybe 1 or 2 hours. And so you could see them on the monitors, but you could also see lots of sources in downtown Juneau on those little purple air monitors, everything from the barbecue, food carts to other sources that people have near their homes. So overall, we didn't see a lot of high level of concern for health effects or violations of the health standard during this sort of sensor study that we did. I would note that during this cruise ship season, the cruise lines, they actually work together to reduce their impact on air quality during the course of the summer. And they reduced their idle times in the harbor, and they switched to lower sulfur marine fuels when they were in harbor or when they were in port. So during this particular study, the air quality was actually pretty good for that summer. We were also trying to determine whether there might be a good single site we could put into downtown Juneau to just use as a long-term site. We didn't find that there was any one particular spot in Juneau, downtown Juneau, that was a maximum impact site. And so we're looking at about 3 different sites right now. We've got some new air sensors. We were a little delayed by COVID this summer. Our air sensors had to be shipped in, which we've got some new sensors that are being tested and deployed. We've tested and deployed them at 3 sites. One is, I believe, down in the flats. One is a little higher on the hill in downtown Juneau, and then one is down closer to the port itself. And we did get them up this towards the end of this summer, and they operated. We also put out some purple air sensors, which were the sensors we had out the previous summer, to see what was happening this summer with the absence of the cruise industry. And we're planning to continue to monitor next summer with these new sensors. And you'll see there's a link here on this slide if you want to get to more information on the Juneau Cruise Ship Monitoring Project. You can find it at this particular website. With these new sensors that we've got enough of them that we're not only going to be monitoring in Juneau, but we've also sent some to Ketchikan, and we're working with the city of Ketchikan and the tribe down there. And we've initiated some conversations with Skagway. So we're hoping to have more of these sensors out, especially during the summer seasons when we get questions and concerns being raised about air quality that is associated with sort of the tourist industry. And I think that's the last slide we have.
Yeah, that's right. Let me stop sharing here so we can see questions.
Hey, Dan, I've got a question for you. So when the air quality is bad in the valley, do you guys have people running around looking for wood stoves that are burning? And what do you do? What's the fine?
That's a great question, Doug. So thank you for bringing that up. And so, yes, so my division works with the community service officers at the Juneau Police Department. And they don't usually have people driving around looking for offenses, but a lot of times we'll receive phone calls from people or citizens who can't breathe that well or have issues or health issues or concerns or asthma or any number of reasons why they're concerned about the air being polluted around them. And so they'll either call my office or call the police department and say there's an air emergency in place and my neighborhood's full of smoke because our neighbors are burning tires or whatever. And so that's usually how the program works. And actually, I shouldn't say burning tires because people know better than that in the valley. People are really great about this. And so, and there is a fine. The police can give you a ticket. It's a $50 fine. The program isn't about fining people. It's about creating clean air. And so, you know, I've found that the community service officers don't like to give fines. They want to give warnings. And 9 out of 10 times, somebody who's using their wood stove during an air emergency just didn't get the message. And so it's not like they're maliciously trying to avoid the regulation in most cases. And so, but we do have that ability to ticket people if there's a repeat offender or something like that as well.
One more thing, Dan, you said pellet stoves were okay. What about the new wood stoves that they're supposed to burn a lot cleaner or recycle the smoke and burn the smoke and all?
Yeah, so there's catalytic stoves. Actually, I just changed out my wood stove and got a new fancy one as well. But no, those are still not allowed during air emergencies. And that's because a lot of times the efficiency of those stoves depends on the type of wood and how dry the wood is that you're burning in it. So it's really difficult to regulate that. And so, no, just pellet stoves, because pellet stoves have a certain amount of moisture and they have a certain rating. And actually they burn in a lot of cases, sometimes as much as 10 times cleaner than even the best wood stoves.
And I might add too on burning in a regular wood stove, if you and knowing how wet Juneau is, the moisture content of wood you're looking for to burn your stove is roughly 20%. You can actually get a moisture meter and test your wood to see if it's dry, which will make a huge difference in the efficiency of your burn and the amount of smoke that comes out your stack. But in Juneau, of course, it's always very hard because it's very wet there to get your wood seasoned and dry.
Who else has any more questions for Dan or Alice? Amy.
Well, thank you both for the work you're doing. And it sounds like a really successful program. So kudos to you and the people you work with. And it's neat to see 2 of our club members working together across the agencies there. I was wondering about downtown, you know, the air quality issues with cruise ships. You did cover that a bit, Alice, but it seems like this past summer was just, you know, an ideal chance to get sort of a baseline with no cruise ships, no big buses going through. So I'm wondering if you had any findings based on that.
I don't have any findings right now. We did get the sensors out towards the end of this summer. So we will have a little bit of data moving into the next cruise ship season. We had hoped to have sensors up all summer long, but frankly, the cargo didn't get here, the shipment didn't get here with the new equipment. So it started up pretty late in the summer, but towards the end of August and into September. So we'll have some data. I mean, it's been clean. I mean, it's generally speaking, Juneau's air quality is very good. And you take that many pollution sources out of the mix, the ships, the buses, the onshore and the cruise ships. This summer would have been a lot cleaner, I would imagine, than past summers, but I don't have the data yet to share. But we do try to make sure that we are getting, especially on the shoulders and moving into each cruise ship season, these sensors will be running. So we will get some data prior to actually having ships in place.
All right, anybody else? John.
So Alice, it seems like the national standards were at some point reported to be changing. Has that happened so far? And the requirements for particulate matter and so on in air quality?
Yeah, the national standards get reviewed every 5 years. They're just in the process of finalizing standards for this latest 5-year review. And the last I had heard, they were not going to be changing in this review. The trend over time has been for the national standards to get more stringent. When I first started, I mentioned they were at 150. Then they introduced the fine particulate standard. The 24-hour fine particulate standard started at 65, and then I think around 2009 they actually lowered it to 35. And I actually wouldn't be surprised if under the next couple of reviews, if it actually goes a little lower, maybe down into the 20s for that 24-hour standard. What they're finding is as we're getting better at monitoring health as well as monitoring pollution, they're not finding a lot of thresholds on these pollutants for when impacts can happen. So that tends to drive this. The standard is meant to protect the most sensitive individuals in a community, like the elderly, children, people with existing conditions. So and there's not, the science isn't showing us a lot of threshold for when they start to see these types of impacts and effects. And so it tends to drive the standards lower or more stringent. And so it wouldn't surprise me to see it lower, but right now it looks like it may hold at the current level for a little while longer.
Well, thank you. And thank you both. Excellent presentation. Thanks.
All right, well, it's getting close to 8 o'clock. So thank you, Alice, Dan, for coming on and